Bonjour les étudiants, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, j'ai une unité à vous présenter à propos du français du Moyen Âge et les idées du Moyen Âge qui lient notre langue parlée aux États-Unis, la plus commune, c'est-à-dire l'anglais, avec le français. J'ai un auteur qui écrit en français, mais qui est d'Angleterre, malgré son nom. Je parle de Marie de France. Marie de France, voici une illumination d'un manuscrit que nous croyons être d'elle. Et donc, je parle de Marie de France et la tradition de la romance arthurienne, aussi dit roman arthurien. Ça n'a rien à voir avec une soirée romantique, mais en anglais on dit Arthurian romance. Donc la tradition dans la littérature anglo-normande. Voilà. Et il y aura certainement une discussion ici de son lait Lanval. Je vous ai envoyé ce soir un exemplaire en français moderne du lait breton de Lanval, écrit par Marie de France. Alors, en parlant de Marie de France, déjà, je vais vous parler de d'où elle a écrit et dans quelle langue elle a écrit. Marie de France était, comme son nom l'indique, une Française privilégiée vivant au XIIe siècle en Angleterre. Elle fait sûrement partie de la cour d'Angleterre. Peut-être qu'elle était la demi-sœur du roi Henri II. Si jamais vous avez vu le film Un lion en hiver avec Peter O'Toole et Katharine Hepburn, vous voyez Henri II pendant sa vieillesse. Alors, il est fort possible que cette femme qui était dans sa cour était un parent proche d'Henri II. Pendant ce temps, la langue de la cour n'était ni l'anglais ni l'anglo-saxon, mais il parlait plutôt un précurseur du français moderne et de l'anglais moderne, qui s'appelle l'anglo-normand, un dialecte du vieux français. Et ils ont envahi, ils ont parlé cette langue parce qu'en 1066, les Normands ont envahi l'Angleterre et l'ont repris pendant plusieurs années. Let me do a little translating for you. Let's talk about the language in which Marie de France wrote and where she wrote it. And Marie de France was, as her name suggests, a French woman who was privileged during the 12th century in England. She was surely part of the English court, probably the half-sister of King Henry II, who would have spoken English very little in his court. Anglo-Saxon was an administrative language in the outer regions of his society. What was spoken in court because of their heritage was French. and to some degree Latin, but Latin was mostly read. During this time, the language of the court was neither English nor Anglo-Saxon. English doesn't really exist in anything like its modern construction or even Chaucer's construction. But they spoke a precursor of modern French, and it's also precursor of our modern English, which is called Anglo-Norman, which is a dialect of Old French. They spoke this language because in 1066, William the Conqueror and the Normans invade England, and they basically own it and are ruling it for centuries. Voici donc un cliché de la tapisserie de Bayeux. We call this the Bayeux Tapestry. It's the most important document of the Norman invasion in 1066. Donc, cette tapisserie semble avoir été le principal document de la conquête normande de la Grande-Bretagne. C'est comme cela qu'ils gardent le souvenir de la conquête normande. Ce n'est pas un livre, un codex, comme on aurait dit à l'époque, c'est une tapisserie. Notez qu'il a été commandé par une femme et fabriqué par des femmes. Parce que qui fait la couture? En ce moment, c'est les femmes qui font la couture. Les hommes ne savent pas coudre d'habitude. Et comme l'étaient généralement les tapisseries du Moyen Âge. À l'époque de la Renaissance, les hommes commencent à avoir des usines, notablement l'usine de Gobelin, des tapisseries. Mais pendant le Moyen Âge, c'est l'œuvre de la femme. It's women's work to make tapestries at this time, not men. Marie de France est arrivée ou née en Angleterre 2 générations après la création de la cour normande en Angleterre. Je veux dire autre chose qui n'est pas sur le diapositive ici. I want to say some things that are not on the slide. Imaginons pour un instant que la déclaration d'indépendance qui fonde notre nation a été écrite par des femmes. Ceci parlerait d'une tradition qui respecte beaucoup la femme. Si une nation pourrait être fondée sur les idées exprimées, ou même si après la déclaration dit parler des hommes d'une indépendance, les femmes ont été celles qui avaient droit de documenter, disons, cette déclaration. Cela parlerait d'un statut social de la femme supérieur que les femmes colonistes aux États-Unis au XVIIIe siècle auraient connu. I'm going to say all that in English. Imagine for a minute that the Declaration of Independence had either been written by American women and then carried out, even if they didn't get the vote, by men. Or imagine that men had said, hey, we're independent, but they trusted the women to document what was, in fact, the founding of a nation. That would speak very distinctly to the social status of women of a society that would do that would have been superior to the social status of women in the American colonies and the early United States of the 18th century. Donc, je note, so I note, que le document qui commémore cet événement très important pour son peuple est créé par des femmes. So therefore, I note that this document, I can call it that, was created by women to commemorate a very important event in the society that kept it. Ceci parle beaucoup du statut social de la femme. Très intéressant. Les femmes ne sont pas les guerrières. ici. Women are not warriors. Vous voyez bien, il n'y a que des hommes sur les chevaux. Il n'y a que des chevaliers hommes. There are only male knights. Mais il serait impossible d'éviter l'observation que le document est fait par les femmes et ceci doit signifier une importance peut-être surprenante. Et donc Marie de France, and so Marie de France, est née ou arrive en Angleterre 2 générations après cet événement, ce qui veut dire qu'elle venait se mêler dans une société peut-être plus égalitaire que nous imaginons aujourd'hui. Alors, je me sens obligée de parler des attitudes culturelles envers les femmes à la cour normande d'Angleterre, bien entendu. So I feel like I should talk to you a bit about cultural attitudes toward women in the Norman court of England at this time. Et donc les attitudes ont été essentiellement mélangées, parfois presque féministes, parfois archi-anti-feminist. So these attitudes were totally mixed, sometimes almost feminist, the way that the Bayeux Tapestry being transmitted to us by the women of this society is somewhat feminist. There was also super anti-feminist attitudes at the same time in the same place, literally sometimes in the same room. D'une part, les femmes ont été blâmées par l'Église pour tous les maux, y compris les actes mauvais commis par les hommes, car Ève a mangé le fruit avant Adam dans le jardin d'Éden. So on one hand, the women are blamed by the church, the established church, I should say, for every single evil. Even evil acts committed exclusively by men, because Eve ate the fruit before Adam in the Garden of Eden. So 2 men go and on a shooting spree today. It's all women's fault, even if it was just 2 men who decided to do it. Why? Because Eve ate the apple, according to medieval church thinking. D'autre part, les Normands avaient une tradition de femmes nobles participant parfois au gouvernement, souvent sous la forme d'une régence pour un roi enfant. On the other hand, the Normans had a tradition of noble women participating sometimes in government, particularly if a regency were needed because a king died, but he had a son who was going to take over. Until he got older, a woman, his mother, might be the ruler until he came of age, which could be a decade and a half. Also worth noting, when William the Conqueror is on his deathbed, he names his daughter Matilda, also known as Queen Maud, the successor. She never gets to rule because it causes a civil war. A lot of men don't want to support her because they don't like the idea of women having that much power. See what I said about the church. And eventually there's a compromise, which is literally the king of the court where Marie de France lives. He's the son of the guy who, Stephen was his name, who fights Queen Maud. They agree that Stephen will rule, but it's Maud's son who comes after. Stephen's kids do not get to rule. Maud's son eventually becomes the ruler. That's the compromise to stop the Civil War. The son is Henry II. He grew up in a house with very interesting, strong women. Queen Maud was no person to be taken lightly, and neither was his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. who is not the subject of this video, but I should probably for another class at another time make a video about her. A few fun facts about Eleanor of Aquitaine in English. She rode on a crusade with other women, and they decided to go as Amazons whom they believed had been bare-breasted, because that way they could shoot bows and arrows without having the restrictions of, I don't know, some kind of corsetry. So she rode topless to Jerusalem, at least part of the way. And Eleanor of Aquitaine does a lot of other unbelievably surprising for our conventional ideas of what a medieval woman could or couldn't do stuff. She has power. And so, all right, I've said that much. Let me go back to the French on the slide. Les femmes pourraient hériter des terres et des titres quand les hommes de leur lignée étaient tous décédés. Later on in English history, if you've ever read a Jane Austen novel, estates are entailed to the male line. But in the Norman court, if all the men died off, women get lands and titles. So it is not impossible to imagine a woman who is maybe even called une baronne and not un baron, but is essentially the highest form of aristocrat in the country, with as much military power as they would have had at that time. And it was indeed the barons who raised the armies. So they would have had military power, provided that all the men were gone from their line. So it occurs to me that I would like to give you a taste in your ear, not of the French that you need to learn. So don't worry that you don't understand what you see on the screen. It's 1,000 years old. First of all, let's just start there. Well, it's more like 800 years old. 900 years old. This is what French was 900 years ago. This is also kind of what English was 900 years ago in the court. And I would have you listen to the rhythm. I'm going to read it to you. This is the thing that I've given you a modern French translation of. L'aventure d'un autre lait, comme elle avait vu qu'intérêt, fait fut d'un mu gentil vassal, en Breton l'appelle l'enval, à Cardoel sur Junot l'irait, Arthur lit pur, et lit cureté, pur les escosses et pur les pies qui détruisent le pays. En la terre de Loingre, en Troène, ému vint la Damajoine. À la Pentecôte en Esté, il y avait les raies surjournées. That's both English and French. So I'm not even kidding. That's English. Do you speak English? Some things to notice about this Middle French text, or this Old French Anglo-Norman text. This is clearly a poem where there are rhymes. And it is taking place in a tradition that lasts for really 700 years as part of the French language, called octosyllable, 8 syllables, and in a line. And you see that it is an AABB rhyme scheme, and it is done that way because it is part of a tradition called a lais breton. And a lais is a poetic form that is narrative. It tells you a story. And Breton means from the northern province of La Bretagne in the north of France. It is a tradition that absolutely travels the English Channel, not just with Marie de France. It is something that is known in the French court of Henri II, or I should say the Norman court of Henri II in England. And I would just have you understand that in doing her writing this way, Marie de France is showing us that she is participating in a tradition that would have been oral at first and probably run by women in Brittany. And also, she is already talking about Arthur, King Arthur, and Loingre, which is in line 9, en la terre de Loingre. That is an old French term for England that is used in many Arthurian legends in the medieval Anglo-Norman or the medieval Middle French. That's what I want to say about this in particular. And then I'll go on in French and in English. L'Enval fait partie de la tradition des romans arthuriens aussi bien que des laits bretons. L'Enval is as much part of the idea of Arthurian romance. Romance, again, does not mean, oh, I love you, do you love me? Romance is a term that comes from the word roman in Latin, which is used in the French, and is used to talk about Arthur. Arthur stands in essentially as a foil in British literature, so to be able to talk about social problems. Like today, if I were writing an Arthurian legend and I wanted to give Donald Trump advice, I might say, "Sire, have you not heard the story of King Arthur and the border wall?" I could do something like that. Because if I go and I say, "King, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're doing," I could maybe get my head cut off. It's a bad idea to anger a medieval king and to insult him, especially in the public court life of the time. I could really get killed. They would literally go medieval on me. But if I tell them a story that has advice hidden in it, I could do that. It also is just entertainment, because just like if you read Spider-Man, no one has to tell you who Spider-Man is if you read a Spider-Man comic, and the villains that Spider-Man faces are knowable too because they repeat, they're typological. That's what an Arthurian legend does. That's what the Arthurian romance genre does. So, back into the French. Le roman arthurien est un genre de conte médiéval traitant des activités des chevaliers qui inclut souvent, mais peuvent ne pas se centrer du tout sur ce que nous appelons aujourd'hui romance. So, what I said before, romance can be in an Arthurian legend, but an Arthurian romance is not necessarily romantic at all. Il s'agit plutôt d'actes courageux commis par des hommes nobles qui sont souvent peuplés de personnages allégoriques et magiques. Briefly, that what they're up to is courageous acts by noblemen, and they often have magical figures, think Merlin, and allegorical figures. Briefly, a review of the word allegorical in case it's been a while since you were in an English class. You all know an allegorical figure. The Statue of Liberty is an allegorical figure in a statue. We know that liberty is a thing. We acknowledge that liberty is an important cultural concept, but it's not like I'm looking in the room and I'm going, "Oh, over there, some liberty fell out of the jar where we keep it." Liberty is not a visible thing. But an allegorical figure such as the Statue of Liberty can stand in to represent something. This is true in medieval legends generally, and it is certainly true in Arthurian romances. Les origines d'Arthur. A lot of people wonder if Arthur is historical or not. Here's by far my best answer. Arthur est mentionné comme un guerrier général dans un certain nombre de textes en gallois, et en latin à partir du VIe siècle, mais on ne sait pas s'il est une figure ou un personnage historique ou simplement fictive. So we don't know if he's historical or not, but we do know that starting in the 6th century, we see in both Latin and Welsh mentions of a warrior general who is called Arthur. L'Historia Regum Britanniae de Geoffrey de Monmouth est le premier texte qui rend compte de ces légendes dites d'Arthur, mais il n'inclut pas l'infidélité de la reine Guinevere avec Lancelot. Lancelot's story of Guinevere with the love affair with Guinevere comes significantly later than this book from the slightly before the court of Henry II in Latin called The History of the British Kingdom. That seems to be a French invention. I'll get to that in a minute. Cette histoire d'infidélité de la reine, avec toujours une accusation selon laquelle Lancelot ne doit aimer les relations sexuelles avec les hommes s'il ne veut pas faire ce que la reine veut, n'apparaît lorsque Chrétien de Troyes les ajoute peut-être 75 ans plus tard. Voilà. So, Chrétien de Troyes is an author from Champagne. And he adds the story of Guinevere's infidelity about 75 years later, and he doesn't do it in England. He's in Champagne, which is having actually a lovely court life. The medieval life of the Champagne region is quite beautiful and very interesting. Il est typique de tous les récits arthuriens que l'auteur adapte l'histoire pour discuter des questions contemporaines de l'auteur plutôt que d'Arthur. So this is what I was saying before. I could tell the story of Arthur and the border wall if I wanted to. And that too could be part of the work. Personnage qui apparaît souvent dans les récits arthuriens. Here are some, here's a list of characters who often appear in Arthurian legends. Le roi Arthur, chef des chevaliers de la table ronde. King Arthur, Guinevere, sa reine. Le chevalier Gawain, qui est courageux. There's a story from what's called the Illiterist revival period of the late Middle Ages called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Le chevalier Galahad, qui est chaste. He doesn't sleep around. Le chevalier Lancelot, dont la reine tombe amoureuse. She keeps falling in love with Lancelot in these stories. Merlin, le magicien de la cour, est conseiller d'Arthur. Et Morgana le fait, une sorcière qui est parfois représentée de manière très positive, parfois de manière très négative, en fonction généralement de la quantité de christianisme attribuée à la cour de Camelot. Let me explain that last one. Merlin and Morgana Le Fay are a male and female, they don't tend to work together exactly, but magical figures in the court of King Arthur. At the beginning of Arthurian legends, being told, the magic is either morally neutral or it is highly moral. You would look to wisdom to Merlin, for instance. But as the court is depicted increasingly as a highly Christian court, and that becomes very important in the late Middle Ages, in order to keep the characters that you would expect to see, Morgana Le Fay and Merlin, they become increasingly evil because Christianity always sees itself in opposition to witches. Peut-être que vous ne saviez pas ceci, This is maybe you didn't know this. This is another part of the Bayeux Tapestry. Même si le roi Arthur est un roi anglais légendaire et que ses aventures se déroulent en grande partie dans des histoires médiévales en Angleterre, un bon nombre des plus grandes histoires arthuriennes ont été écrites par des écrivains français. Le plus connu et important des auteurs des romans arthuriens, c'est Chrétien de Troyes, un auteur champenois. I mentioned him before. He is by far the most notable and the most prolific Arthurian legend writer. And he writes to entertain a French court, though all the stories tend to take place in England. However, there are some Arthurian legends that have legs. As far south as Sicily, there was the imagined apparition of King Arthur in Sicilian legends, which is very far away from Wales or North England. So let me talk to you specifically about L'Enval. C'est ainsi que le conte du roi Arthur est adapté par Marie de France. Marie de France takes an existing genre and she kind of twists it. Dans les romans médiévaux, il n'est pas rare que des femmes ressemblant à des fées apparaissent soudainement. It is not surprising if fairies and allegorical magical figures suddenly appear out of nowhere in medieval romances. Cependant, il est rare qu'un chevalier soit sauvé par une demoiselle plutôt qu'une demoiselle sauvée par un chevalier. It is strange that the person who does the rescuing here is not the knight in shining armor. That is worth noticing. Notez que la proposition que Lancelot obtient habituellement est donnée à L'Enval. L'Enval is the one who the queen falls in love with, not Lancelot. Notez les similitudes entre la situation de L'Enval avec la reine et celle de Joseph avec la femme de Potiphar. In the Bible, Potiphar's wife propositions Joseph in the book of Genesis. He has favor with the king. He's kind of a viceroy eventually, but he's a slave first, and he's Potiphar's slave, and his wife propositions him, and when he refuses, she accuses him of attempted rape, and he has to go to jail, and lots of stuff happens. Eventually, God takes him out of jail. And it's interesting that she's followed this model here. Notice also that the queen at the end is not punished for lying. She is simply accused of spoken erroneously. She was wrong rather than libelous here. And the king doesn't ask too many questions about why would she lie about something like this. And that's pretty typical actually of the Arthurian legend. The queen doesn't always get in trouble in Arthur's court for having committed adultery or wanting to. Marie de France écrit sur les amants déçus. A lot of Marie de France's stories are sad. This one is not sad, but a lot of them end in very unhappy ways. Marie de France est probablement la première personne, certainement la première femme à écrire des sonnets en français. Presque tous ces sonnets parlent de la douleur de l'amour. So all of her poems are sad poems, especially these sonnets that would have been, she's certainly the first woman to write sonnets in French. Beaucoup de ces histoires parlent de femmes mariées malheureuses et des amants qu'elles tentent d'avoir. A lot of unhappy married women appear in Marie de France's story and the men that they want to run around with. Cela peut donner au lecteur un tableau de sa propre vie. People think, who are scholars, that this may in some way resemble the actual life of Marie de France. Mais en L'Enval, nous ne lisons pas une histoire triste. We don't see a sad story here. So I would like you to consider in L'Enval who needs help and who saves who. And I want you to think, as I'm saying here in the French, about the difference between your expectations based on stories you have read about knights in shining armor and damsels in distress, and what Marie de France presents us, because I think that this is a rich topic of discussion for us when we see each other on Zoom. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you on Zoom in class.